The sled pull in HYROX is an absolute race killer. I personally have experienced a 7-minute sled pull, and it is not a great way to have a good time. So in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly how to improve your sled pull so you can maximize your time in a HYROX. My name is Rich Ryan, a 2-time Elite 15 HYROX World Championship qualifier with a PR of 54.28. 1/3 of the coaching team at RMR Training with reigning world champion Meg Jacoby and Ryan Kent. The variance between a good sled pull and a bad sled pull is massive. So you want to do everything you can to make sure you are on the good side of things. So we are going to talk about the 3 things that can put you toward that good, which is going to be your technique, your training, and your strategy. So let's start with technique. So the best way to have a good sled pull is to make sure you are maximizing the amount of space you are moving within the box given to you. It's about a 6-foot box from front to back. So you want to walk from the front to the back with the sled pull rope in your hands so the entire time. Anything that's going to inhibit how far you're going to move in that box is going to slow you down because you're going to have to do more work and make more pulls. So what you have to make sure is that you have a clear path behind you. So rope management is critical. So you want to make sure you're taking an extra second or two to move that rope and manage it so it's to the side of your box, not into your competitor's box, but on the side of yours and directly behind you. So making it like almost like a straight line so it is not directly behind you. So when you start the pull is on the outside of either your right or left leg and not directly in the middle. A huge mistake people make when they first start is having that rope directly behind them. It just is intuitive to have it directly in the middle, but the rope position doesn't change because your hands are out in front of you directly in the middle. So the rope needs to be to the right or the left to keep that path clear behind you. Another big mistake I see people make is trying to use their arms too early and too often. So first thing, if you're trying to go arm over arm, it's not going to be the fastest. It's just not. It's too taxing. You have to be an absolute monster. And if you're able to do it, you're going to be so spent after, or you haven't been able to put out as much effort as you have in front of it just so you can go arm over arm on sled pull. It just doesn't work. Don't even try it. The second thing is that we want to make sure our arms are completely straight as we start our pull. It seems intuitive that when we want to move the sled toward us, we want to start pulling it toward us using our arms. But we want to make sure that we are moving backwards the entire time. If we are pulling this rope, there is a possibility that our arms straighten because the load is too heavy, and then our hands are moving away from our body, which is the opposite direction where we want to go. We want everything to move backwards. So your arms and hands should really just kind of be hooks that hook on to that rope so that you can drive through your hips and your legs to move it backwards. So an early arm bend is not an advantage, and you need to keep those things straight as you're pulling backwards. A few cues that I like to make during this part after your arms are completely straight is to open your hips and extend your knees. This is just going to move that sled immediately for you, and the faster you can do that, the better it's going to move. So a violent opening of your hips and then extending your knees to move yourself backwards is a cue that you can use so that you make sure that you're moving it to the best of your ability. The only time you should bend your arms, and you should do this every time, is at the very back of the box. This is the best way to get the most out of every single pull. Ideally, you want to make the least amount of pulls possible on each length. So pulling at the back is just going to give you a little bit more, even if it's like 1 inch. That's 1 inch less that you have to move it the next time. So when you get to the back of the box, pull the rope, even if you can hardly move it. And in training, if you do this every single time, you're just going to get stronger. So even if you're not feeling super powerful during the race and you want to conserve some energy, you don't feel like pulling at the back, do it during training because it will make you stronger. It will make you better. So now let's talk about training. So for training, we're going to talk about frequency, we're going to talk about intensity, we're going to talk about modalities, and we're going to talk about some accessories that can help you get better at the sled pull without just doing the sled pull. So if you're a little bit more interested in the nuts and bolts of training, I suggest you grab the RMR Training Essentials Guide. It has our 5 favorite styles of workouts that all of us use in our programs that we write for ourselves and for the athletes that we coach. It's completely free and a great resource for you if you want to build your own program out. So if you're a person who just isn't doing the sled pull, you should start. Start to do the sled pull, practice it often. I try to do it at least twice per week, and I think you could probably do it a little bit more. There's nothing in this movement that is going to really break you down too much. The hip opening can be a little bit taxing on your lower back, and I've had some SI issues with that in the past, but there's not a lot of eccentric loading, so you could do a good amount of sled pulling. And because the load is so far out in front of you, it's not incredibly heavy like how a deadlift would be. So 2 or 3 times, I would err on the side of caution and do 2, just so your intensity during those 2 sessions can be really high. With the intensity, I want it to be as hard as I can go basically every single time. There's no purpose to doing this slow. If you're doing it slow, you're just going to train yourself to do it slow. And we want to get this station done as quickly as possible. So when it comes to loading your actual sled, I would put just a little bit more weight than your competition weight, just so it's a little bit overloaded. But once it starts getting too heavy and you can't really move it that well, and everything takes a big setup, or your feet start slipping, or your grip starts slipping, then we're really not doing ourselves justice when it comes to the training. So making sure that it's intense enough, but maybe like a little bit overloaded. I like 10 to 25 pounds, honestly, is enough to make it heavier than the competition day. When you get to competition day, you know that it's going to be doable because you've done a little bit heavier in training, but not a lot heavier, because then you are trading the intensity for load. And this is about getting it done quickly. In my 2 sessions per week, I like to do one standalone where I am just pulling the sled, working on technique, working on speed, working on strength. Another time that is more of a compromised HYROX specific session. You could probably swap these in either direction, but I like to have one standalone where it is basically sets and reps when it comes to sled pull, just to improve my confidence, to improve my specific strength for this movement itself. So it's not just HYROX stuff all the time. I am working in some of the specific strength when it comes to the sled pull. So there are a couple accessory movements that I do recommend for the sled pull. The first one, and my favorite, is called the rack pull. This is basically a deadlift from your knees. What the rack pull does is it allows you to overload the weight that you would typically do in a deadlift from your knees up. So you're getting a lot of that hip opening action at a heavier weight. For most of us who are doing HYROX, who are not high level power lifters, the limiter in our deadlift is going to be from the ground. So not being able to lift it literally from the first inch of the ground to like your ankle. That is mostly where people are going to fail out. So moving it to your knees allows you to do a little bit heavier of weight here, so you can overload that opening, which we're going to do a lot in the sled pull. Plus, with the actual deadlift, which I do recommend doing deadlifts in your programming fairly often, but the deadlift relies on vertical forces. You're driving straight through the ground to move the weight directly up. The load on a sled pull is out in front of you, so it's a horizontal force. So there is crossover, but it's not a one-to-one. Another piece that is very valuable when it comes to the sled pull are sled drags. So this is just moving way closer to the sled and driving backwards in one consistent motion. So it would be like 12 to 25 meters at a time, straight backwards. This is going to increase the time under tension that you have on the sled. Moving closer to the sled is going to allow you to move heavier weight. I would also recommend doing this with better grips. It could be TRX handles or gymnastic rings. Something is going to not make grip the limiter on the actual drag, so you can go as heavy as possible. Now that we have our training and technique dialed in, let's talk about strategy on race day. The low-hanging fruit for the sled pull is hustling during the transitions. Your transition from one side to the other is all effort-based. So if you go faster from one side of the lane to the next as you are not moving with the sled, you're going to cut time off. It's a great way to just use your own effort to make the sled pull better. So I recommend picking up that rope even before you get to the box, just so you can get set up with that rope in your hands. Cuts down on time that you might be resting. Oftentimes, we'll run to one side and kind of rest, kind of gather ourselves, and we lose all that time that we just gained on the transition. So if we are ready to pull that sled right away, then we're going to cut down on time, and mentally it is more positive to keep the momentum rolling. I also suggest you go hard. Just get this station done. Reduce that time under tension. The best way to get through this is to not have to continue to pull it. So pulling it hard and being explosive and aggressive every single time is very important. Now, a caveat is you need a little bit of juice so that when you get into the station, you can move it fast. So it's important that you manage your effort through those first 3 runs and through the ski erg in particular. Sled push, you might have to be aggressive, but after sled push on that run, making sure that you are managing your effort appropriately so that when you get into sled pull, you can move it well. I would give back 5 or 10 seconds on that run to gain 30 to 40 seconds on the sled pull every single time. So when you're transitioning from the back of the box to the front of the box to the start of your next pull, there's some debate on whether you should drop the rope or keep that in your hands. In the past, I've kept the rope in my hands and have just continued to have that momentum, and just keeping it positive and not dropping it makes it feel like I'm moving really well. But there are times where I have tried that technique and I end up dropping the rope anyway. And then mentally, it just kind of hurts. It's like, oh, am I actually too tired now? And it's almost non-voluntarily, I just end up dropping it. So I've pretty much switched my technique to dropping it every single time, and I've found the time difference between the two is almost nothing. So I recommend doing whatever's best and making sure you're practicing one specific way so that you know what you're going to do during race day. But personally, I drop it every time. As you come into the station, you're going to have the option to get some chalk on your hands to improve your grip. I suggest you do this. Another option is to have chalk in your pockets. This is a great little hack so that you don't have to move away from the sled later in your sled pull, and you can keep that momentum forward. Having the chalk in a bucket away is just an excuse to move off of it so that you can just like rest a little bit. And if it's not going well, like, oh, I need rest. Oh, maybe I need chalk. Probably not. The chalk will help a little bit, but it's probably just your overall effort that is stopping you. So having chalk on your person is very valuable. I personally wear gloves. So I have gloves in my pocket during the first 2 stations and runs. After the sled push, I put the gloves on and then I discard them immediately after the sled pull. I usually try to find where the athlete warm-up area is and just toss them in there. It's like 50-50 if I get them back, but they're like $15 on Amazon. They're wide receiver gloves that have a tacky surface, so the grip is great. They're pretty bulky and definitely not meant to wear the entire race because they're just like too warm. So that is a little strategy that I'd recommend. I've seen people also use gardening gloves. They have a sticky surface as well and are a little bit lighter, so that could be another option if gloves is something you want to try out. If you found this helpful, do me a favor and share this with a friend. Hit me with a like and subscribe so you don't miss any of the new things coming your way. Drop me a comment if you have any sled pull questions or any hacks that you want to share with the community. I'll talk to you soon.